So just before we get started today, I was just going to do a little intro to try to make clear and try to make some of the parts of this workflow really separate and distinct, so we can kind of figure out what's going on. And just to reiterate this, you saw this in action yesterday, but you're going to have your metadata, you're going to have your objects, and then you're going to have the collection builder template. And then Jekyll is the static site generator that's going to knit that all together, pull all those parts. And yesterday, Jekyll was that was not on your own computer, that was on Github Pages build. So they're doing that for you, but they're using Jekyll to generate your final digital collection website. And as you can see already, CollectionBuilder is not a web application. You don't have that GUI admin interface that you might be familiar with if you've used WordPress or Drupal or Omeka here, or Content DM or Islandora or anything like that. So those are kind of content management or data asset management platforms, and they're familiar. They have an ease to getting started, but it does come at some significant infrastructure costs. They have heavy, really complicated servers. They use a lot of energy. They require a lot of IT support, and they also need constant updates and maintenance to avoid having a lot of security risks. In contrast, CollectionBuilder is a static web template. You've already seen it. It's a folder of files, so really minimal infrastructure. And in that case, using it is also going to look very different when we get it down to our local machine, which is what we're aiming at today. So instead of that admin interface that you might see, CollectionBuilder is going to look something a lot more like this. Looking at a lot of spreadsheets to create your metadata, and looking at a text editor. And so this text editor here is my Visual Studio Code. You can use any text editor you want. And here's kind of this folder of files that I can navigate around. Here's a file that I have open that I could edit. And then here is the integrated terminal, where I can give the command line command Jekyll S, which is going to build out that site so that we can use it and develop with it on our local machine. So we really want you to be able to focus in on doing this really quality digitization, doing quality metadata work, doing that work of really curating and creating interpretive content around this aggregation. And that investment in that kind of data that's going to drive this template is the part that's really, a lasting impact. You can reuse that in a lot of different ways, and we want to have that work done separate from the platform. And that's kind of the scholarship, the research, the curation in that description, rather than having that embedded directly into the system. So why would you actually want to work in this way? Well, there's actually a pretty big boom in static generators over the last 5 to 7 years. And with modern static web approaches, you give up some of that ease of using that content management system, GUI, admin interface stuff. But on the technical side of things, there's some big benefits. Just performance is really fast, better access for users all over the world on all kinds of different devices. From an infrastructure perspective, it's just super simple, minimal infrastructure, minimal IT, minimal costs, minimal maintenance, lowering your security risks overall. Third is a simplified developer experience. It's relatively easy. Few of us are full stack developers. We wouldn't go generate our own kind of repository platform, but you can master working with CollectionBuilder without a computer science degree, and it's totally customizable. So we believe that some of these kind of like parts of the static web, the modern static web approach, really work well for digital humanities type projects in our context, especially in libraries as well, because it's really setting up some very sustainable workflows and sustainable infrastructure that kind of matches the way that we actually do our work. And so it's cost less, there's less maintenance. You can do these really rapid iterations through your projects, which lets you build it in smaller steps, get feedback a lot faster. That's kind of a principle of agile projects in general. So you can do less investment on the front end and get a better product through your work in these iterations. It really supports having these focused periods of development and collaboration, followed by very long periods of minimal maintenance or no maintenance, which is the reality of most projects in academics and grant-funded type work. And so if you look out there in the landscape of digital humanities, you're going to see so many broken projects, and a lot of it is broken because of the infrastructure underlying it. And the static web, it might not look beautiful in 5 to 10 years, but it's still going to work perfectly fine, and it's also not going to be a security risk for your users. So And then finally, in our context, preservation and migration is going to be a reality and something that we really aim for. And so the data and these web outputs of the static approach are going to be very simple and sustainable formats that are ready to, be preserved, digitally preserved, and also ready for the inevitable migration to some kind of new platform of the future. So it's a good investment in that data that you're actually working with. So as you see this week, learning CollectionBuilder, we're really trying to kind of teach more of a development approach than a single app. So we're kind of building up, your ability to use some of these tools and workflows and components and remix them to create different things. So before we start working on this all today, I just want to try to really define some of these terms that we're going to be using and the parts that go into this workflow. So the first set, which is really what we used yesterday, is we kind of have this version control and platform and collaboration platforms ingredients. And so the first thing we use is Git. That's a version control system. It's a piece of software that you have on your computer or on a platform like GitHub that tracks the history of changes in a folder of files. And you guys were already making some commits, and that's using Git yesterday on GitHub. And so GitHub is a web platform. It's the most popular web platform for hosting code, and it's really a Git repository hosting service. And so it's a platform that's built around Git version control, and it's a place where you can kind of store and sync your project online. You can kind of think of it as Google Drive, optimized for code, with really robust track changes all built into it. And that web interface provides you a way to work with your files, work with your project, and also a whole bunch of project management stuff built in there, as you've already seen with those issues and some other features. And so it's really a powerful platform for that. And there is other alternatives out there that do exactly the same stuff. GitHub is just the biggest and most popular, so there's a lot of help available. And then Github Pages is a service that's built in to GitHub, and that's what we've been using. All of you used to generate a website last night. So that's free static web hosting that's built in to every repository. And so it's really great because you just click a button, as you see, and get a website. And so we use this all the time for learning. You don't have to mess around with setting up some infrastructure. You don't have to mess around with installing stuff. And so it's really important kind of in that workshop context or in that learning context. And in DH, we really want people to be able to do that messing around to learn, exploring without having to, spend a bunch of time working on infrastructure instead. So that's kind of that project management and hosting part. And today, this is kind of where we're trying to get to, is the second set of workflow ingredients. So the kind of things that power CollectionBuilder underneath. I'm seeing some chat, and should I look at that? Or okay. All right. Sorry, I can't. My chat window's disappeared somewhere into one of my monitors. My second workflow ingredients starts out with Ruby. And so this is a programming language that you need to use Jekyll. And it's a really popular programming language with web applications. You don't need to know anything at all about Jekyll or about Ruby to use CollectionBuilder, but you do need it installed on your system. And so this is probably the most frustrating part of the install process in this kind of development environment that we're setting up, mainly because it's a pretty rapidly changing language. It's fairly young, and there's big unstable changes in between the versions. And so people, if they're going to run into an issue, typically run into issues with different Ruby versions. The next thing that we're going to use is a Ruby gem. Well, two Ruby gems, Bundler and Jekyll. And so Ruby gems are little packages of Ruby code that are a piece of software that you can install on your computer. And gems is the package management system that Ruby uses to do that. And so you have probably already done this, hopefully, and you do a gem install Bundler and gem install Jekyll. And so that's using that gem application, which is a package manager to get these little pieces of software installed on your system that are written in Ruby. And so the first one is Bundler. And this is a dependency management system or app. And in theory, what we're doing is it's going to record the kind of environment that you're going to be using to develop your project so that it's reproducible, so that it's less chance of it breaking if you move between different computers and over time. So it kind of records exactly what your setup is when you start developing this project so that you can reproduce that setup if necessary. And then Jekyll is our static site generator. And again, that's just a piece of software that's really packaging together a whole bunch of development tools that are used to convert your folder of source code into a complete static website. And so it gives you some of that power of a content management system to build out your site into all these little component chunks and drive things using data, our CSV of metadata, without all that infrastructure of running a server and having all this admin stuff running in the background. And so we're going to use that today. And we're going to leverage Jekyll's toolset so that we can write some content in Markdown, use this liquid templating language to create layouts out of a bunch of modular components, and then use some metadata to generate our web pages. And the final bit then is CollectionBuilder. And you've seen that. You have your own copy right now of CollectionBuilder GH. And so that's really just a template. It's a template and a starting point for your digital collection project. And it's a source code that's written in a bunch of little chunks of HTML, JavaScript, CSS. Those are kind of the components of the web. And then Liquid, which is our templating language that can pull things together that Jekyll can convert into your digital collection website. And so we've tried to really design the template in a way that you can just gradually learn how it works in a very scaffolded way. You can just start the project like we did yesterday on GitHub without really doing too much at all. But then you'll gradually be invited to keep editing it and customizing it and learning a little bit more about the web, about Jekyll, about CollectionBuilder and how it works along the way of that process of learning. So I think, like I said, it's really important to be able to do that messing around, create some interesting things, and that's a really great way to learn. All right.
Thanks, Evan. So yeah, so that's the broad technical overview. And now we're going to get into actually using GitHub Desktop to do some of these Git commands. And the question in the chat was, is GitHub Desktop a GUI for Git? And it is a GUI for Git. It's sort of kind of GUI for GitHub. So it's kind of in between. But it does all the Git commands. It makes those easier and more visual. So we'll look at that in a second. But real quick, did anyone have any issues with the installation of software, or are we ready to go to use that all? Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to run through a quick kind of step-by-step just to show everyone that the clone to push move here and pulling things down on your own computer. In the docs, I'm in this repository section, essentially in this clone repository, open repository, generate site, working with Git and commit changes. We're kind of going in the same part as this, but I have a little document here to kind of condense our work, and then we can go from there. So the first step is to clone the repository. And so I need to get to, this was Andrew's, I need to get to our DHSI demo site. So this is the one I'm going to work with. You should be working with the one in your, for your homework collection or your demo collection. So the first step is you're here at GitHub, and GitHub makes things pretty easy to use. And so they have another nice green button to use. And so we're going to click on Code, and then we're going to click on Open with GitHub Desktop. And that's going to open your GitHub Desktop, which might take a little bit faster, take a second more than mine. And then it's going to say you're cloning a repository. So what you're doing here is you're using that git command clone, which is essentially copy, pull down a full folder of files onto your own computer. And so this is where that folder of files lives on the web. And this is where the local path where GitHub is going to place it. And GitHub by default often puts it in the documents folder in a GitHub folder, and then you can start to reorganize your folder however you would like, but I always just put everything in this GitHub folder and leave it there. So I'm going to clone it down, and that will copy everything to my computer. And so you can see that it's cloning, and then we're going to have several options to move through it. It should not take too long. We do have a number of objects there, so it's downloading those. And it's updating files, and it's done. Okay, and then it changed. It was not changing up there. So then, as you can see, so this is GitHub Desktop, and we can look at all the different options it has available to you. You have the current repository is listed here. As you get more repositories, you can jump to them based on just clicking this and looking at the different repositories. When you make a file change, those will show up in this area here. And then this is where you would make a commit message, click commit to make that commit to your Git repository, to your folder of files in the Git file. If you want to see the changes that have been done, you can see all the changes that Olivia made yesterday, just like you can online, except it's a little easier to see in some ways. So we can see all the config YAML changes she made. Again, we talked about branches. We only have the one branch here, but if you had more than one branch, this is where you could switch to them. And this automatically connects with your Visual Studio Code, which is nice, which I'll show you in a second. And then this is the Fetch Origin button. And this button changes depending on if you've made any changes to the repository. Right now, we could fetch origin to see if anybody had made an additional change, like if Evan or Olivia had made a change. And I would click that, and if they had made a change, it would pull those changes down into my folder of files. But where is that folder? Let's go find it. So Visual Studio Code makes it really easy. You can show an Explorer here. You can use this repository option, which is what we mainly use for most of our things. You can go and view on GitHub. You can open in the terminal or command prompt. You can show an Explorer. But let's just look actually at my own computer here, just to make sure that we understand. So it's in the Documents folder. I know that. I'm going to open that. Here's that GitHub folder. Oh, and here is DHSI demo. So there it is. It's the same kind of folder of files as we had on the GitHub place. Again, you can use this button here too, and that'll just do it right away. This is the same folder. You can look at the changes. You can edit this in the plain text editor if you wanted. But what we really want to do today is edit this and open in Visual Studio Code using a development server. So we're going to open it in Visual Studio Code. You can use this button here, or you can open it here using this option here. And so now that folder here is right here. And this is essentially the same thing as we just saw. It's a folder. You can copy these files. You can delete these files. Here's our metadata. We can look at that. I have a little extension that you can get from this extensions option called Rainbow CSV, which we would like you guys to get if you haven't got already. So you can more easily read a CSV file and edit it if you need to. And here's our config YAML that Olivia edited yesterday. So now that we've opened the repository, I'd like to put it into a development mode and look at it on our local computer. So we're going to go up to this terminal option here.
Devin, do you want to zoom in a little bit so people can see?
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks.
Is that too much or is that okay?
I think that's good. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, sorry about that. So we've got a new terminal option here. You can also click Control and backtick, which is that top left button on your computer, but I usually just use this. And then this is going to open the terminal within Visual Studio Code. So you can obviously go and open a terminal from on its own, but this is nice because it's together with your folder of files, and you can use it in combination. I have mine set to Git Bash, and that's what we'd like the default for you to be if you're on a Windows computer. And some of you on a Mac computer also might have this, or you might have ZSH. Which is fine as well. And if you want to change that default profile, you go to this drop down here, you go to select default profile, and you will get the option up here. I'm good, so I'm going to leave that as it is. So we've got a new terminal up, and now we need to start our development server. And so the first thing to type when you first download a repository is you want to make sure you get all those dependencies that Evan was talking about. That bundler can manage. So we're going to write, our first command is bundle install return. And you could also, if you wanted to, go to this generate site if you want to kind of copy. Sometimes it's easier to copy commands so you don't make a mistake. And then the next command we're going to do is this bundle exec Jekyll S. And so I'm copying that there. But as you can see, so it went through and it fetched all the gem metadata after I did that install. And I'm sorry I didn't have you watch this, but it made sure we had all the right dependencies here. And yours might look a little different. It might have had to go fetch some software and download it. I was already kind of ready for this, so there's not as much information. And so our next command is going to be to start the development server on your own computer. And so I just copied that from the web, but it is bundle space exec space Jekyll space S. And S is shorthand for serve, which is the server that you're going to hit. So let's do that and see what this site looks like. So you're going to have a bunch of, or several bits of information come at you as it's building. And this built very quickly, so it was done in 6 seconds. This just says the configuration file that we used, which we knew was the config YAML. This is where the source is. This is where the destination is. So it's important to know in Jekyll that it's always going to be a folder of flat files. The website that it creates is just like if you've used HTML, it's just that. And it's in this underscore site folder. And you can see that it's muted here. It's faded out because you don't want to go in here and edit it because this is where it's constantly regenerated. And this is where those files live if you ever wanted to build a Jekyll site and push it onto the web somewhere else. So you can look at it real quick. There's our 404, our index.html, locations, map, and that's where all the kind of code gets built. But we don't want to actually mess with that. So we want to look at those files, how they look in a browser. And to do that, we go to the server that has been set up there. So I'm going to push Control click. If you're on Mac, you push Command click. And this will open up our site at this URL, 127. And sometimes it'll have maybe a folder in the backslash if you use the base URL option. But for right now, it's going to be at this base URL. And we can go and look at our collection and make some changes. So we can see here, this is what we had up on GitHub Pages, the exact same. But I know, we probably want a featured image. And so that's going to be our next change. We're going to make a couple changes and then commit those changes. So in order to find a new, an image for that big splash page here, that sort of featured image, we typically think, we suggest you get one that is horizontal in nature and large because it's going to be going to spread across, large screen. So we want to have a decent photo, and it's usually nice to have it horizontal. So I typically go to my browse page and kind of scroll down and say, you know what, I don't know what I want. I'm going to try to find, let's do this one with the car here, the Duesenberg convertible. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to say, okay, this is that. And then I need the object ID to make the next change. And the object ID can be found here, or it can be found in your spreadsheet. And so the file we're going to change to change that file is called the Theme YAML, and it's in your underscore data file folder, and it's right here. So there it is. And right now, the featured image that it's looking for is demo 001. But that was in our demo collection, and that is no longer the metadata that's being referenced. So there's nothing for the code to find. So we need to put in a new object ID in that field to change that. So I'm going to push the one I just grabbed, the Psychiana 024, and I'm going to save this file. And you can see here that, regenerating. So it's rebuilding the entire collection. This is kind of the great piece of Jekyll. And it did so in 2.5 seconds, which is great. So now I can go back to the main page, and let's see if that one showed up. Oh, and there it is. So we've got a new picture. You can see that the code has automatically pulled that picture in. It has made a link to that picture if somebody wanted to see that picture via this featured image option here. But it's also kind of rough because it's cutting off everybody's head. So let's see if we can make it a little bigger and get everybody's head in there. So I'm going to say the default, this home title Y padding is pushing on both sides to kind of make the image bigger or smaller, depending on what you make that option. And here's another option, and this is using a CSS component called M, which is a space measurement. And I'm going to make it a lot bigger. So I'm going to call it 12. And let's see if we can get to the top. So you can move the banner image to be centered on the top, the bottom, or the center, and the default is the center. So let's see what happens if I push it onto the top and make it big. I'm going to push refresh. And actually, that's not great either, because that's just getting a lot of the top. And so, I'm going to go back and edit that and get rid of that. I could change it to center, but the default is center. So I'm just going to get rid of it, and it'll go back to center and see how that looks. So one more time, I'm going to refresh. So I'm going to push Control R. You can also push Control Shift R for a hard refresh. And there, I've got a pretty nice picture of, this is Frank B. Robinson sitting in front of his fancy Duesenberg convertible. He was the richest man in Moscow in the 30s. So there we go. We've got a good sense there. We've made that change. And I want to make one more change with you to this collection to see it go. And so I was in this Theme Vml file, which Olivia is going to go through in detail after me, and in the data folder. And now I want to go and let's change something in the config too. So Olivia changed all this yesterday and called it the DHSI demo collection, but it is Psychiana. So let's make sure that people know it is Psychiana, and I want that in the title. So I'm going to change this in the config YAML, and I'm going to push save. But if you notice nothing changed. Nothing changed in the terminal. And if I go back here and see, this is where that title should go. I'm going to refresh, and nothing changed. And so this is the only file that's like this in the folder, but it's something that is important to know. Well, there's a few like this, but the one that you're going to run into, if you ever make a change to your config YAML, say you want to change the tagline or the description, or even connect it to maybe a new metadata sheet, you need to restart the terminal if you want to see it show up on your development server. In order to do that, we can scroll back up here and read one more thing. So this says server running, press Control-C to stop. So in order to stop the server, I need to press Control-C, and that's what I'm going to do. And it's going to say terminate batch job, and I'm going to say yes, and push return, and that'll get you back to your command line options here. And so now I want to restart the servers, which is I need to put in that bundle exec Jekyll S command again. But the great thing about the command line is you can just push up. And the command line has stored your commands history. And so once you push up, it'll recall the last one. If you had one before, I pushed up again, it's bundle install. Oh, no, I don't want that. We've already done that. I'm going to go back down and get bundle exec Jekyll S, push return. And it will regenerate the site. And it should be built now. And so it's made that, that small change to Psychiana. So hopefully you all can kind of walk through that, take some time right now and make those changes if you didn't get through that with me. But those are the main changes that get going. And now we're going to make one more. We need to make sure that this goes up to the site. Adam?
Yeah, I ran into a little bit of an issue. I was trying to do what you were doing, but I was when I attempted to type in Visual Studio Code, sort of nothing happened.
Oh.
Yeah.
With it, you were trying to type in the terminal, or were you trying to type in a file?
Yeah, in the YAML file, I tried to, and it didn't seem to kind of register. I can share my screen super quick and just to show you what I'm talking about.
I'll stop my sharing.
You know what? I can't. I don't have.
Yeah, I'll make you a co-host here. Okay, you should be able to now.
Cool. Let's see here. So yes, I wanted to, I don't know. We'll say like yeah. So I'm typing right now, but nothing's happening.
Something weird going on. You have, yeah, like you can see there's some weird, you're in some weird mode somehow. I have no idea what that is. Okay. I've never seen that. You might just close. Wait, now is something happening? No.
Did paste
I'm pressing spacebar, but nothing seems to be happening.
Okay, I think I would just close Visual Studio Code and reopen it for now. Oh. And then let's see if that gets you anywhere. It looks like you're in an odd editing mode.
Okay.
And it was like, because yeah, there's like this weird output going on in the down below. Is it still the same thing? Yeah, it's still like.
Yeah, still the same thing.
So see where it says normal down in that blue bar, down towards the bottom. Is that clickable?
Right click on it.
I've never seen that before, and that seems to be somehow, yeah, you've got a weird, yeah, sorry. Hold on. Let's see. This is a new and very interesting one.
Yeah, we've never seen this.
Jeez.
Well, Evan, do you want to break out with Adam and then I can finish this and then we can catch him up in a little bit?
Yeah.
Sure.
Maybe just, yeah, I guess we could try to, I don't know how to do a breakout room. I've never done that. Or do you just want to keep going and we'll try to do this later?
Yeah, well, maybe one of us will Google it while we're waiting, and then we can go from there. So I'm gonna get back into my share here, and so we've made these changes, and I just have one more step in my kind of step-by-step here to finish. And so let's finish that. And so we've made 2 changes, and now we go back to our GitHub desktop and want to push those to the web. So we said, oh, okay, we changed the config YAML, and we changed the theme to a new featured image. And so I need to make added new feature image and changed title. So I'm making a commit message here. I push commit, and so that commit is staged in the repository now. And you can see here, if I wanted to undo it, I could push undo. But what I really want to do is push it up to its origin, to GitHub, where this repository is connected and where you can collaborate on it. So we're going to push. You can either push origin here, or I usually use this button up here, or push origin. And we'll see that those are now on GitHub. Let's see if that has come through. You can see we pushed, it came 30 seconds ago, which seems impossible, but there it is. So we've got the 5 commits now. We have our new commits, and then my changes to the site probably aren't live quite yet, but if we refreshed a couple of times, well, they'll come eventually. So what this is doing though, once it gets pushed up to GitHub, GitHub is rebuilding the entire site again. So sometimes it takes a second depending on what GitHub's loads are like. But eventually, of course it won't do this for me. It's up there, I promise you. But that's how you would update your collection on GitHub Pages. So this is the relationship between your local development site and your controller up there. You make changes locally, you check them, you save them, you commit them locally as well, and then you push those commits up to GitHub Online, and they will never update your website when you want it to. Oh, there we go. Okay, and then that is it for me. So thank you.
Okay, so Devin just took you through using GitHub Desktop. As we kind of mentioned, you're using a piece of software called Git, and you can use that in a lot of different ways. And so you've already used it on GitHub on the web interface. You can also use it in GitHub Desktop, which is what Devin just took you through. And then you can also use it on the command line, which is kind of how it was originally set up. And so, and the other place you might use it is inside of your built into your text editor. So I'm just going to quickly run through that just to show you kind of those steps in a different way. Just to reiterate that these are a set of Git commands essentially, and there's lots of different ways to get it done, and they're all just working on that folder of files, the same folder of files, no matter what interface you're using to use Git or to use Git. So GitHub Desktop is not a magical thing, and a lot of people, it ends up sometimes getting confusing about like, oh, I can't do that because it's tied to GitHub Desktop. It's still just a folder of files, and it's your folder of files, so you can do whatever you want with it. So I'm back here on the DHSI demo site, and there's this green button here for code, and you're going to see when we started out to clone this down to my local machine, there's this whole open with GitHub Desktop button, which is how you did it using GitHub Desktop. But I'm going to use the command line now to clone it to my machine. And so right here, it says clone and HTTPS, and there's a link. And so I'm just going to click the little copy button. And so I've copied that link. And now I'm going to go over to my folder of files. So I have my, on Windows, my File Explorer. And I'm just in my documents. And I have this GitHub folder, which is where I want to store this new repository. And so I can actually just right-click on that folder, and there's an option here that says Git Bash here. There's the same kind of option on Mac and on Linux. And you need a terminal that opens up in a location where you want to clone this project. And so I have a Git Bash terminal here on Windows. And let's see if I can make it bigger here. Whoa, not quite that big. There we go. So here's my command line. This is exactly the same terminal as the one that's integrated into your text editor. On Mac, you could also, it's called terminal. On Windows, it's going to be called Git Bash. And you're going to see a couple things here. This is kind of my username and computer name. And then right here is actually the file path. That's the location where this terminal currently is acting. And so this is the Windows style location. So I've got C, drive, users, my username, the documents is my documents file, and then this folder called GitHub. And so that's where I want to clone this repository so I can start my new project. And so I'm going to do git clone. So every command line command, you start with an application, which is Git. I want to use Git. I'm going to give it a command, clone. I want to copy those files down. And then I'm going to give it an argument. I need to give it that.
Whoa.
Here we go. So I'm going to do git clone. And I did Control-Shift-V to be able to paste something into the terminal. Otherwise, you could also right-click in your terminal and say paste. And then I'm going to press return to give it that command. And so this is doing the same thing. It's going up and it's asking GitHub, hey, does this folder exist? And it says, yep. And then it gives it, and I start downloading it onto my machine. And I can go look into my folder here, documents, my folder GitHub, click in there, and I have got some more folders. And then I have this brand new folder right here called DHSI demo. And so that's what this did. It just made this, went up to GitHub, it created this folder right here, and then it filled it up with exactly what was on GitHub. All those files that are there are now here on my local machine. Now I want to open up that folder so I can start working on it. You can, Devin showed you on how you can do that on GitHub Desktop really quickly. Another quick way to do it is to, again, right-click on it and say open with code. And you're going to get a similar kind of option on Linux and Mac. And then your editor is going to open up. VS Code is going to open up right in that location. So, and so you can see, here's my project folder and all the same things as we just saw with Devin. And I can do my control backtick to open up my terminal. And I have that same bash terminal that I was just looking at in a separate window. But I have it here and it's located here in this DHSI demo folder. So I can do that, all those same commands to generate my site. Now let's say I want to make a little change. You know, Devin's title is not that great. So I'm just going to remove the demo part. And just make it DHSI Psychiana collection. And we'll just do that for now. And Olivia's, you know, the author is also me, so I'm going to put in my name as well. And I'll press return, or I'll press Control S to save that file. And one of the things you're going to see right away over here in VS Code, right in this corner, you're going to see something, a little alert show up here. And so these are the little tabs on the side of VS Code. This first one is your Explorer. So it has this pane that has all of the files in this folder that we're looking at. This one is to search, and you can find and replace using that. This pane right here is your source control pane, which is your version control, which is going to be Git in this case. And so you can see it's already the same as with GitHub Desktop. When it realize that you made a change, something shows up there. And so you can actually make your commits using this little pane here. And all the same sort of things as you can do on GitHub Desktop are actually available here. GitHub Desktop is going to be a lot more visual and rich with all the information that it provides you, but this is a very fast and efficient way to make some commits. But I'm just going to keep going on the command line just to show you what that looks like. So I've made a change. I'm going to say git status tells me what's going on. It says that there's something changed, so I'm going to do a git add all. So I've staged those to be turned into a commit, and I'm going to do a git commit -m to give it a message and a quote. Changed title and author to make them better. And then end that quote and then press return. And so that's a commit. We did the same thing as we did on the web interface. We did the same thing as we saw on GitHub Desktop. And now I need to push that up to the web so that Devin and Olivia can also collaborate on it. So I'm going to do a git push to push that up. And so it's going to give me all this information about what happened. And now that's the same set of steps that we went through with Devin, but we just did it on the command line rather than on GitHub Desktop. And I didn't share that with you just to like get y'all confused. I just hope that that kind of reiterates, that there's a series of Git commands that we use to work on these projects, and you can use it in a variety of different, via a variety of different interfaces. Any questions there?
Or is anybody's software not working correctly?
I think we figured out Adam's had a Vim extension, and hopefully by disabling that, it's working.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's what I was going to say. It looks like you're in Vim mode, and it's like that when you're in Vim, it switches back between editor and command mode. And so if you're in Vim, you give commands that are like kind of like macros to do all kinds of fancy stuff. And then you have to switch into edit mode to edit stuff. And so that's what it was doing. Are you a Vim user, or do you just?
Oh, no, I've heard that Vim is incredibly difficult and probably way up my skill level. So no.
So that was very similar to that one stack edit where you can't figure out how to get out of it. And so probably to get into editing mode was like, :Q edit or something, like, I don't know. And so, yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you for that very interesting debugging.
Sure, thank you all.
It's working for you, Adam, then?
Yeah, let me give it a shot. Okay. I may have to close it and reopen it.
Yeah, you often have to do that with Visual Studio Code when you make a change.
Yep. Yes, it's working now. Thank you all.
So, interesting thing on Visual Studio Code and GitHub Desktop are called Electron Apps, and they're actually just built on the base of Chrome browser, Chromium. And so really it's just another browser with an app built onto it. And so when you have all of those open, you're just running a bunch of Chrome all over your computer.
Cool. Olivia.
Okay. So I am here in my GitHub Desktop. And the first thing I want to do, so what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through some changes you can make to the pages and the way that things are looking, the information that's showing up on your site, starting with the Theme Vml file. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I pull those changes that Devin and Evan just made. So I'm here in my GitHub Desktop app. I can look at this Fetch Origin button, and it hasn't been fetched for a while. So I'm going to click it. So that it'll go back up and look at the repository and see what's changed. And now you'll notice that changed to pull origin. So it realized that there's some changes that were made and were pushed. And now I need to pull them down before I start working so that I can incorporate their changes. So I'm going to just click this pull origin button. And now I'm up to date. So I'm going to go to my repository now. I've opened it in Visual Studio Code. And the next thing that I want to do is edit that Theme Vml file. So again, that's going to be right at the top here under in your data folder. If you just expand that and then go down to theme.yaml. So this is just the same as our config YAML. And we have our comments and our variables, and Devin already edited a few things here. I'm going to get my site up and running though before I edit anything. So I'm going to type bundle exec Jekyll S. And one thing that I wanted to point out is that if you have a collection of PDFs or videos, for instance, and you don't have any images in your collection to use as your featured image, you can do one of two things. You can either drop an image somewhere in the repository, anywhere you want to is fine. We suggest going to the assets folder and then dropping it in images, but you can put it anywhere you want as long as you then take that path to where that image exists, and then you would just paste it into this featured image field. So that's if you have an image that you want to add. If there's a path to an image somewhere else that you would like to use as your featured image, you can actually just use a full URL to wherever that image is stored, and that you could just paste that in this field too, and that would be your featured image. That's just in case you need to use it that way. I'm going to go ahead and copy this server address.
Also comment it out and then not have a featured image.
Oh yeah, good point. Okay, I'm going to move this. Okay, so here is my site with all the new changes. What I'm gonna do now is just go down this theme page, and it's organized in a similar way to the config in that everything is sort of grouped together according to where you'll find it on the site. So this is the homepage section. I'm gonna move down and see there's an item page section, a subjects page, and so on. The item page section just lets you turn the browse buttons on the item pages on or off. So that is talking about these buttons to the side here. And those are very useful for users to be able to browse through image by image. But if they can slow down the time that Jekyll takes to actually build your site, so that's what's happening whenever we make a change, remember. And if you are building a very large collection, particularly, then you probably would maybe want to turn the browse buttons off, and you would say, you would say false to turn them off. And then when you went to publish your site for good so that people could look at it, you might change that back to true. So that is a malleable value that you can change according to how you're developing and what you're developing. I'm going to go down to the subjects page now, and the subjects page, the first variable here is my subjects fields. So this is controlling what shows up on my subjects word cloud here. And you'll notice that it doesn't have to just be the subjects field from your metadata. Right now it includes both subject and creator. So I'm going to come to my metadata and take a look at what's there. And see that maybe there's another field that I want to include here. And you could just delete subject if you didn't want to include it. I'm just going to add one more field to this. I'm going to add item information, and that's a unique field to my collection that I think people might like to visualize the frequency with which it appears. It's just indicating, in this case, the sort of physical format of these items in this collection. So I'm going to save that, but before I go look at it, I'm going to edit these other fields as well. Actually, let's go look at it first. So now I have a ton of words in my word cloud here, and I can tell that item information is showing up because I know flyers is an example of a value of that field. But say that I don't want my word cloud to be this big because maybe it's not useful to people when the words are that small. So I'm going to increase the amount of time that a word has to appear in my metadata subject or creator item information fields to be included in the word cloud. So right now it just has to appear once. I'm going to increase that to 2. The other thing I can do is if there is one subject that is like connected to every single item, like maybe say Psychiana staff. If I clicked on that and that took me to the browse page and it said 67 of 67 items, I know that that's a subject that's attached to every single item in my collection. And remember, the whole point of the subjects page is to facilitate better browsing experiences for users. So maybe that's not useful. I know in this case that's not the case, but I'm just going to use this as an example and put it in as a stop word here. So now I'm going to save, and I'm going to go back to subjects, and my word cloud is much smaller, a lot easier to read. So it's totally up to you and your preference and what you want your users to see, but there's a lot of ways you can change it. One last thing I want to point out here is that flyers is we've established that that's part of my item information field. And when I click on it, I'm going to notice that nothing shows up in my browse page because when you add a field to subjects, you also have to add it to your browse card. And it doesn't have to be visible on the browse card, but it has to be there in some form. And I'll show you that in a little bit, how to add that. But it's something to remember as you're filling out your subjects or locations or data or anything where you're adding a new unique field. You want to always go back to browse, because remember, everything in CollectionBuilder is interconnected, and a lot of fields lead you back to be able to browse for other items with the same subjects. The locations page works exactly the same, so I'm not going to do an example of that here. And I know I'm going kind of fast, so if it's totally fine right now if you just want to sit back and watch while I do this, and then take your time during your homework too. The next page is the map page, and so let's go see our map and decide what needs to be done. So I always like to zoom out when I get to my map because there's often little data points that are over in a different location and aren't showing up if we just left it where the landing page just zooms in on Idaho. So I'm missing the New York items, for instance. So 2 things that I might want to do then are be able to zoom out my map when I land on the page, as well as change where the map is centered. So I'm going to do that first. And the way that I do that, the way that I change where my map is centered, is I go to Google Maps, and then I just zoom out. And then I think for this collection, because there's items all over the country, I'm just going to find the center of the United States and do what Devin did yesterday. I'm just going to click the lat and long there, and then come back over, and I'll just paste it right here to start over the current value that's in latitude. And I'm going to grab longitude, delete that extra comma, and then paste it over the current longitude as well. So if I save that, I can go look again and refresh. Okay, so now I'm in the middle of the United States, but I can't see any items, so I need to zoom out a little bit. So the lower the zoom level here, the more zoomed out you will be. So I'm going to change that to 4 and then go look. And now when I land on this page, I'm exactly where I need to be able to see where all of my items are. The other things you can change are you can change the map base. So if you want to, you can choose from one of these 3 items: World Street Map, Nat Geo World Map, or World Imagery. So let's say maybe I'll change to this one. You just copy that option and paste it over the current, whatever's there currently. And then map search lets you turn off or on the map search, which is usually useful to keep on. You can change the map search fuzziness. You can change whether these map points appear as clusters or points on your map. So if I were to turn this to false, that is going to make these little points instead. But I like the cluster, so I'm going to change that back to true. And then you can set the radius of the cluster. So if you want it to include more, if you want, well, let's go look at a cluster to see what that looks like. If you want this to like include more than 11 points, oops, then you would increase the number in your cluster. If you want it to, if you don't want them to be clustered as much, you can decrease that number. But there's my little cluster there. So a lot of customization options with that. When I move on to the timeline page, there are a couple options here, and both of them are referring to the year dropdown. So that's what this is editing is. Right now, it's automatically generating your ability to jump to the year in increments of 5. And that is this field right here. So you could, if you didn't want it to do 5, you could set that to 10. I think 5 is fine. Alternately, if you didn't want to have, if you had like a really unique collection that jumped to really different years, maybe you want to actually add your own years, and you would just delete the value from here and copy this this example data here just to make it a little easier on you, and then change this to whatever you want it to be. Make sure that you keep those quotation marks around this field though. But I'm just going to go back and put 5 here because I liked that. So nothing changed on that page, but the next thing, this data part, I do want to change. So the data is referring to the fact that CollectionBuilder is not only taking your metadata and using it to build all of these pages and visualizations, but it's also making it easy to export it so that people can use it for all different types of things, for their own research, etc. And that can be found down here in this collections as data card at the bottom of the home page. You can also, so each of these buttons allows you to download some data. You can also download data from the data page. And there's a little bit more of an explanation for what each button actually downloads here. But what we can control in the theme is the metadata export fields. So what sort of the entirety of your metadata that you want people to see. So in this case, I often do this, I'll just copy all of my metadata fields. So that's going to be the first row in my CSV. So I can just copy that and paste it in, and make sure to include keep those quotation marks around it, and then paste it over the values that are there. And since I pasted that in, once that my site is live, then somebody will be able to click on metadata CSV or metadata JSON, and it will download all of those, all of my metadata in the fields that I've specified. The next section lets me edit the metadata facets fields, and this is this button right here. This is often best to look at in Firefox, so I'm going to open a new window. And the reason is that it kind of color codes things for you, but it lets you see what your metadata facets are depending on what you've chosen. So each field that you've chosen is faceted. So here I have my subjects field, and I can see now all of the terms in my subject. I can see how often they appear. So that can be really useful if you're new to a collection and just want an overview really quickly of what you should be highlighting when you're building your collection. I can see the creator field is here too, and the format field is here as well. So let's make a change to our to this one and say, I also want to include date and item information. So I'm going to save that. And once it's regenerated, I will go back to Firefox and refresh. And now if I minimize these, I can get down to the bottom and see, here's my date field. So I can see when most of the items have occurred. And then the item information field, so I can see what all of my item formats are. And that's the reason Flyers was appearing so large in my word cloud, because it appears quite a bit, as well as photographs and single page and so on. So that's really useful. We like that feature a lot. And okay, so that's saved. Now the last part of this theme YAML file is some advanced options. So these aren't directly related to your collection data, but they affect how your site looks and feels. So this might be something you come back to at the end, or if it doesn't matter when you do it, but just know that these are not messing with your metadata, they're actually messing with the look of your site. And that's everything under the advanced options section. So the first section here is Navbar Colors. So this is going to change the color of your navbar text and the color of your navbar itself. So this this navigation bar right here. And we're using something called Bootstrap, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. But Bootstrap is just a package of CSS and JavaScript that lets you kind of style your site and style the layout in a way that is good for responsive, so good for different size screens, and does it really easily. It's very popular all over the web. So that's what we're drawing from here when we say navbar dark. You can choose from navbar dark or navbar light. I'll just pick that so we can see how it looks. This one has options too, so I can say maybe background light too. Well, I'll save that and go look. So you can see my navigation bar has changed and it's completely light now. I don't really like that, but it's something you can do if you're playing around with your style. I'm going to change it back to dark. Boot swatch themes is a way that you can edit the entire look of your site with just by changing one thing. So boot swatch edits the entire Bootstrap theme, and there are many options. You can choose from all of these, kind of check them out, see how they look. Devin's favorite is Flatly, I know, so I'm going to take a look at that. And so it just changes your buttons. It changes the way some of the features are looking. It changes the colors of how things are showing up. So it just kind of alters your site a little bit. That it's not something that we have ever that we really recommend using all that much, but it's fun to play around with. And if you find something that works, definitely go for it.
Yeah, I think we have those in there really for that playing and messing around and demoing just how powerful CSS is in HTML. And so, yeah, the Bootstrap swatch is just a retheming of the entire Bootstrap package. And so it's just a really neat way when you're demoing with some students or some people who are learning just how much can change just by changing not the code underneath, but just the style using CSS. And so we don't ever use this like in production. You probably wouldn't want to use them, but it's a really great demo tool just to kind of like show how powerful CSS is and do that messing around to learn.
Yeah, we have found that students really like it. So that is a good point. All right, I'll get rid of that. Okay, the last thing that you can edit is this theme fonts section. So you can choose the base font size. You can choose the text color, the link color. So right now the links are, wait, I didn't save it. Let me save it real quick so we can see. Our links are usually blue. And I can't find an example right now, but you could change that to whatever hex code that you wanted. You can also have fun playing around with the base font family. So, and you can use a font that is from an external source too. So if you wanted to use Google fonts, I know that's a popular one. You would need to also then include the fonts CDN. So if I used Roboto, I would, and that's a Google font, I could put it in there. And then we put this example link to the font source there, and I can paste that in and then go look at how that changed. So it kind of made my font a little bit skinnier. I also pulled up the Google fonts, so you can go to fonts.google.com and check these out as well. So if you find something that you really like, say I like this one, I'll say select this style, copy the font title, paste it in, and then go and copy this link here. And paste that in. And so it gives your site a little bit of a different look. It's pretty easy to change, and that can be fun to play around with too, and teach you know, what a CDN or a content delivery network is doing with your font. Are there any questions about the theme?
I have a quick question. How does the changes in the theme file relate to the SASS file? Is that like a CSS stuff? Would you ever want to go in there and change anything, or would you just stick to the theme? Or I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, there's a couple ways to answer it, I guess. If you wanted to change, make your own changes to the CSS, you can go to this SAS folder here and choose the custom SCSS, and then make a change to like the way maybe your paragraphs are appearing, red or something. And that would allow you to overwrite whatever is in the theme. So really the only parts of the CSS that you're changing in the theme are these, is down here at the bottom with the theme fonts. I don't know, Evan, do you want to?
Yeah, I would just reiterate some of that. Is essentially what's in the theme are some basic overrides that we do to Bootstrap. And so the cool thing about cascading style sheets is that they cascade. And so the first one gets loaded and all those styles apply, but then every one that gets loaded after it actually cascades together so that the ones later, the last one that's loaded overrides all the styles above it. And so what we do is first you're going to load Bootstrap, and then you're going to load any of the individual CSS that might be necessary for that page, like the map or the tables. And then we're going to load the CollectionBuilder's customizations that we've done to make our features and things work. And we've tried to keep it really minimal, just to be able to really, you know, stick to the Bootstrap so that it's a little bit easier to customize if you don't have to go and figure out what we were thinking about. And then the last one that's going to get loaded is that custom CSS in the SAS folder. And that one is just kind of for if you want to directly write some CSS that's going to override everything else, that's your place to do it. And that way you don't have to mess around with the template CSS. You can just override it with using that custom .SCSS. And the reason why it's a SCSS is it's SAS is like a language for writing CSS in a more programmatic way. And so all CSS that you might know, if you know any CSS, is valid SAS. But then SAS adds in a whole bunch of things like variables, calculations, and some sort of functions that make it a little bit easier to set up a theme with your CSS so that you can kind of write it in these modular components. And so that's what's in that _SAS folder is what they call partials. So the little modular components that get pulled together and then processed and then exported as that final normal CSS file for the project that your web page is actually going to load. And so Olivia currently is looking at the assets CSS custom.scss, and that's kind of like a stub file that's setting those variables that you can set in the theme and setting some of the variables that we use to control the theme overall. And you can actually go in there and edit those if you wanted to. And those are, but that's not a super common customization. And that's kind of like the stub that's going to pull in all those other CSS and output finally the final one CSS file that is used by the project. Does that kind of help out?
Yeah, both those answers were great. Thank you both.
So one thing I'll show you right now is that, so I made that change to my custom SCSS, but I don't want to keep that. So Visual Studio Code has this option to discard your changes that I find really helpful. So if I just come over to, so I've come from my files and I've clicked on where this little 2 is showing up to show my changes. And now if I hover over to the right here, I can select discard changes and it'll make sure I want to do it. And then that file is back to normal now. So that can be a helpful thing to know. So the one thing I want to do before we run out of time is we really want to add that the item information field to our browse cards so that we can click on flyers and have it show up here. So I am going to do that by jumping over to this other place where we can edit how our site looks. And this is our config CSVs that are in the data folder as well, in addition to that theme YAML that we've already updated. So I'm going to get rid of that or close these fields here. And then I'm going to come over here in my data folder and look at what I have available. So I have config browse, config metadata, and so on down the line. And this is all in your in the documentation too. We walk you through each one of these, and they all work very similarly. So each one is a CSV. So that means that what I'm looking at here is the first row is the fields in my CSV, the field names, and then the next rows are all of the data that I'm importing into this CSV, and this is controlling what is showing up on my browse cards. So I probably want to have my metadata open at this point to see what my fields are and what I want to include. And there's a few different options. So I know that I want to add item information. So I'm looking for the field here and typing in item information. And then I could add a display name to it and say something like item format. And if I save it at this point without filling in these other options, I can go to my browse page and see now I have item format showing up with the content of that field for that item. But say that I don't want that. Maybe that clutters up my browse page too much. So at that point, then I would say, okay, I don't want a display name to show up. So I just delete the content from that column, but then I leave it blank. So it still needs to be there, but I don't want to add anything to it. So I'm going to skip to the next column, which is button. And if I select the field true for button, that means that my item information field is going to start showing up as buttons. And it's kind of hard to tell unless you look really closely, but I have single page clippings are appearing as buttons now, along with my subjects and locations buttons that are already there. But maybe then I think there's too many buttons on the browse card. So I'm going to get rid of true and just leave that column blank as well, just like I did for my other one. So I do that by adding a comma. And then my next column is hidden. So maybe I want it to be hidden. So I say true. And now the item information is present, it's here. So I'm going to be able to search for it if I go to flyers. It's 16 of 67 items, but I'm not seeing it anywhere. So that can be an option too, especially if you have maybe a larger field that you want to have searchable, but you don't want it to be seen on the browse page, on the browse cards, because maybe it clutters it up. So that is a really good option. That's what I like to do with the item information here. The last option here is if you want your field that you're adding to be sortable, and that is through the sort by button over here. So right now, title and date you're able to sort by title and date. I don't see any benefit to sorting by item information, but if I did, I would say item format, and then that is going to show up in my search dropdown, or sorry, my sort dropdown. So I'm going to delete that because I don't want that to happen, and just save my file here. I'm also going to go back and get rid of these fonts because I don't like them. So for your homework tonight, you'll be doing the theme for your own collection, and then you'll be jumping over to all of the configs, config CSVs. And so just kind of an overview of what those are. Again, this is all in the documentation. The config map will let you edit what is showing up in your map pop-ups here. So notice there's a bunch of metadata fields showing up. You can get rid of some of those or add more of your own. Your config metadata is really important. That is what's going to edit what shows up on your item page. So you might find yourself deleting some of these fields. If you don't have a field, it's not going to show up. It's not an empty field is not going to show up, but maybe you're just cleaning up this file and you don't have latitude and longitude, so you could get rid of those. And then you probably have some fields you want to add. So item information is one that I want to add. And display name. So everything has a display name here. That's what's in bold. So I'm going to add item format. And then you can make it a browse link, which we do with subjects automatically. So that leads me back to the browse page. And since I've added item information to my browse cards, I can say true for browse link. Config nav is going to let you edit what appears in the configuration in the navigation bar. So locations, maybe this isn't a very useful page, so I'm going to get rid of locations. You just do that by deleting this whole row, the locations row. You can add in your own pages or a drop down, and don't worry too much about that now. We're going to show you that later. It's a little bit more advanced, but you can add pages as well as delete them. If I wanted to add it back in, I could say locations.html, and then it would be back in my navigation bar. Search is going to let you edit the search page that pops up. So if I search for Robinson, right now I can see that there's a title and date and description and maybe some subjects showing up when I search. And it's allowing me to hit those fields when I search. So I can add more fields if I want to. And say that I want it indexed, and maybe I don't want it to display though. So you have all of that ability to choose those. You can edit what shows up on your data page, what metadata fields are showing up in your table. That is through the config table, and that one's pretty self-explanatory. And then finally, you can edit the config theme colors, which these are all Bootstrap colors. So that's what these are. But they let you edit the buttons, for instance. So if you click on, maybe you really don't like this color of a button. And so if you click on it and, let me zoom in. If you click on it and say inspect, and then you look at that button's class, you can see that it has the class secondary. So obviously the secondary color is gray. If I come back over here and you can use a hex code, or you can type in green, for instance. And now if I refresh everything that had the secondary tag on it, is now going to be this weird green color. So that's, again, playing with the CSS a little bit. I'm going to delete that. But that concludes all of the configs, the config CSVs. So really tonight you're going to be working on practicing your push and pull skills from GitHub and focusing on the theme and the config CSVs. So let's review so I can see my changes over here, but I'm going to jump out to, actually first I'm going to stop my server by clicking Control-C and then saying yes, and then jump over to GitHub Desktop. And I can see my changes that I've made. I'm going to say maybe something like theming site for my commit message. And then I can say commit to main. And I can push, the last step here is again to push your changes that you just made. And now Devin and Evan will be able to edit this when we resume tomorrow. So are there questions? Have I missed anything?
Great. All right. Well, why don't we stop the recording for the day, and then we can take questions and do any troubleshooting. I know we